The final thing that we'll talk about in this module is how to get to the jQuery documentation. One of the very key things I think every jQuery developer needs to know is how to deal with the documentation and kind of navigate around it, because you will spend some time in this, especially if you're new to jQuery. So this is an example of what the documentation page looks like, but let me go ahead and pull up the browser and we'll actually look at that directly. So I've navigated to jQuery.com, and this is where we looked at earlier to get the scripts. You can get the production, the development version, but you'll notice right up top we have the documentation link. Now that's pretty obvious. You may say, why are we even covering this? And well, I want to point out a couple of key things and a couple other ways you can get to it. Now this takes us to docs.jquery.com. Now what this does is categorizes things by the core jQuery functions, selectors, which will be the next module, how to work with attributes, how to traverse nodes, manipulate nodes, integrate CSS and styles, handle events, do animation effects, AJAX calls, various utilities, and some jQuery internals that are built in. And then there's even more you can go into as well. Over here on the left, this will go away when you click, but over here on the left, this will stick around. So I normally navigate using the left side links. Now that's one way to get to it, is docs.jquery.com. I actually have that bookmarked in my browser, so it's very simple to get to very quickly. You can also go to api.jquery.com. You'll notice very similar things down the left, but this particular screen shows everything you can know. Now, this particular item is something that I find a little overwhelming if I was new to jQuery, because it lists everything, which is probably too much. So I prefer to go through the docs.jquery.com and work with that. Let's go over to jQuery.core real quick, and if you recall, when we talked about the ready function, I mentioned that you can either do $, or you can do jQuery. Well, this talks about that particular item and shows what you can pass in. You can pass objects, something called selectors, but as mentioned, most people will just go in and do the $. That's synonymous with jQuery, as it says right here. If you don't want to do the $, you can certainly go with jQuery if you prefer, and call directly through that object, but it's up to you on how you'd like to go about doing it. Now that's kind of something you'll do all the time. In fact, you're going to be using, whether you use jQuery or the $, every time you write a jQuery expression, you'll be using one of those two. And again, I prefer the $. There is some information in the docs. If you have a conflict with another script library, then you can look up this no conflict. I'm not going to go into that in this case, but there are some other libraries out there that also use the $. So if you run into any conflicts, this will help resolve that. All right, now where it gets interesting is we can go in and get into some details. So the next module we're going to cover is selectors. Now I'm not going to go into details here, but there's quite a bit to this particular screen. You'll notice we have all kinds of keywords you can use as I scroll on down here. So a selector is a way that you can find either an object, or you can look up objects based on strings, IDs, classes, styles, attribute values, all kinds of stuff. And this particular help page teaches you everything you need to know about it. Let's say you want to do some AJAX functionality. Well, there's also a lot of different AJAX functions you can do and call. So the jQuery.ajax is the low-level interface, as it says over here. It allows you to have complete control over whether you're doing GET requests or POST requests, JSON or XML or HTML or whatever it is. It's kind of the low-level interface where you have to write a little bit more code. Then there's ones like jQuery.get that are a simple way to just make a GET AJAX request. And this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting, because you'll notice that there's several different parameters that can be passed. And how would you know to do those? Well, if you had that VS.doc file that I showed earlier in this module, you'll get IntelliSense as you type $.get or jQuery.get, either way. But as you scroll down in the docs, you'll notice they provide some direct samples. So this particular one calls this GET, goes and gets an HTML page. When that's done, this callback gets returned here. Now at the bottom of each of the documentation pages, there's also an area where people can comment. So I found this useful in a few situations where I've read the docs on a particular function, and some of the functions are a little more obscure. You know, you're not going to use them every day. And I've read the docs and kind of went, not sure I get exactly how I'm going to use that. So also scroll down, because a lot of times people will post some examples of how you can use them as well. And of course, if that doesn't work, go fire up your favorite search engine. There's tons and tons of blogs, articles, all that type of stuff out there available for jQuery. And then again, we could just keep clicking around. We can go to the CSS. We're going to be talking about quite a few of these methods and or functions a little bit later in different modules throughout this course. All right, so I would highly recommend, once you get the jQuery script going, you already have the ready function wired up, get familiar, spend time knowing how to get around the documentation page, because I pretty much live here when I'm working with some functions maybe I don't use that much with jQuery. Very, very useful reference.